On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcaster.
And I'm Katherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing.
Hi, Kate Schweit here from Stop the Killing podcast, popping into our listeners to give you this special update on some hot news that just came out of the U.S. Supreme Court on a case called U.S. versus Rahimi. It is a decision that we've been waiting for, because it has to do with whether or not people who are domestic abusers and under certain circumstances have warrants protection orders for somebody. Is there a possible right to take their guns away from them under the current law, which is passed in 1994? The answer is yes. That question was challenged. It went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Today, the United States Supreme Court ruled 8-1 in favor of the 1994 ban on firearms. So we'll explain that just a little bit. We'll just do a couple of quick minutes here. So the justices in this decision then reversed a ruling from the Federal Court of Appeals in New Orleans that had struck down the law. It's super relevant for, say, as a boring lawyer, from a constitutional standpoint. The Chief Justice himself wrote the opinion. He said, I'm going to read you something from the opinion, which I think is really interesting. He said, and as a background, there was a restraining order out on this individual, and the question was if there was a restraining order out because there was somebody who was having a domestic situation, and that's what the restraining order was based on. Could you also prohibit them from having guns? He said, in his opinion, when a restraining order contains a finding that an individual possesses a credible threat to the physical safety of an intimate partner, that individual may, consistent with the Second Amendment, be banned from possessing firearms while the order is in effect. He wrote this, which I think was very interesting. Since the founding, our nation's firearms laws have included provisions preventing individuals who threaten physical harm to others from misusing firearms. This case goes back to 2019. There was a drug dealer in Texas who assaulted his girlfriend and threatened to shoot her. And then she ended up getting a restraining order against him. And the order, because of the 1994 federal law, then suspended his right to have a handgun and prohibited him from possessing any firearm. I think one of the things that also was kind of astonishing, we've talked about this case before, is that he not only ignored the restraining order, he flaunted it. He threatened different women with a gun. He was charged with assault with a deadly weapon subsequent. In the space of 2 months, he had opened fire 5 times in public with a firearm. One of those was because he was mad at a restaurant and so he just consistently, flagrantly used his firearm, and so that may go into consideration in subsequent cases, but in this case, what we're seeing, and it'll have to play out how the courts in the lower courts decide whether or not somebody still has a Second Amendment right. But I think this case clearly says they don't if there's a threat. This guy, the types of things that this guy did, because he was upset about somebody's social media post, he shot an AR-15 style rifle into his former client's home. When a fast food restaurant declined his friend's credit card, he fired several bullets into the air. So these kind of shootings led to the search warrant on his home, which resulted in the weapon violations. And then the judge initially rejected his Second Amendment challenge to the law, and he pled guilty. He was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison, but the Circuit Court of Appeals rejected an argument that the law violated his Second Amendment rights. And they kind of said that in a footnote. But what happened is when the case was eventually heard by the full Court of Appeals, they reversed his conviction based on the 2023 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court just last year, right? 2023 U.S. Supreme Court decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol, the Bruin case they call, because the Bruin case seemed to New York State Pistol Bruin case in 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court seemed to vastly kind of open the door for all gun rights. And so when they did that, this Rahimi case was already in play and coming up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it was interesting, for us to see, would the court use the broad discretion that was provided in the Bruin case to then turn around and say, this Second Amendment protection is so absolute that it also applies to people who are domestic abusers. One of the kind of random interesting things that I wanted to just fill in here in terms of practicality is that one of the arguments that the United States attorneys made in November when they argued this case, and that some of the justices commented on it, is that if this background check requirement, if there's a domestic violence background and prohibits you from getting guns when you go to purchase a gun, if that domestic background item from the 1994 law fails, here's what the federal government argued in this case. They said, in the 25 years that they've been able to trace background checks that had been done, 75,000 gun sales have been blocked based on domestic violence protection orders. And the justices, understandably, were concerned about the idea that maybe that would disappear and you wouldn't have a right to have guns taken away from or prevent a domestic abuser from getting guns. The challenge to that is that we know when it comes to violence involving firearms that domestic violence is so common. I was just listening to, and I don't have the numbers in my head, but I was listening to something the other day. I was listening to some lectures by Julie Kafka on intimate partner violence, and she was talking about how prevalent intimate partner violence is when it comes to firearms. She said male abusers with access to firearms are 5 times more likely to kill an intimate partner. And when that happens, they're 2 times more likely to kill others. In addition to that, when they do commit that kind of intimate partner violence where they kill somebody, 46% of the time they also end up killing themselves. So it's really a tragedy upon a tragedy upon a tragedy. So I think this is a really important decision today. So I wanted to just mention this to you since we knew there were 2 cases that were coming out in this summer, one on the bump stocks, which we'll talk about separately, but then this one that we felt was very important. I teach a class in Second Amendment at DePaul University Law School, and this was a case that we felt, we had a lot of discussions with the students about because they wanted to know, where did I think the court would fall, and truthfully, I just didn't really know. And so this is fascinating to find out that the court is, Justice Roberts has specifically said, the Second Amendment has limitations, and that's what there are many people who have been arguing that it doesn't. So I just wanted to share that particular piece of breaking news with you today. Okay? Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. And if you want to know more, Katherine's book, Stop the Killing, is out now. For more details, go to katherineschweit.com. Please consider also supporting our independently made podcast. It's simple to do. Go to patreon.com/Stop the Killing. And for as little as the price of a latte a month, you can be part of the solution to stop the killing. Patreon rewards range from official do-gooder status to ad-free episodes, autographed books, and opportunities to connect with us directly for your business, school, church, or even just a book club chat. But just knowing that you are part of a movement that has the power to make your community safer, well, that's got to taste better than a skinny cappuccino any day. So please head to patreon.com/Stop the Killing now and polish off your do-gooder halo, and make sure to include your name so we can give you a shout out. This podcast is a Community podcast production. That's Con with an N. If you want more content, then head over to Community Podcast at Instagram, where you'll find trailers on more binge-worthy true crime, like the award-winning podcast Conning the Con. And check out our show notes for all the links mentioned. Finally, if you want one takeaway action that you can do right now that can help make our community safer, please share, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. Everybody needs to know that they hold the keys to see something and say something. Together, we can stop the killing.
It's one of those things you hope never happens, but you better train for it because it will happen, and it will happen in places you wouldn't expect. Be ready for it.